There is an amazing news I'd like to share with you tonight. All right, so investigative journalist David Hundeyin has finally won Tinubu in court in US over the Chicago drug case that has been dragging before the presidential election. Before I give you details of what happened in that case, I'd like you to watch a teaser or a snippet of David Hundein's documentary about Bola Tinubu and his
recruit 50 million youths into the army and take away from their recruitment source. What they will eat? Cassava, agbado, corn in the morning, yam in the afternoon. It's growing here. You create demand and consumption.
On October 11, 1990, federal agents from the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration knocked on the front door of 460 Taft Place in the city of Gary, Indiana. Once a booming steel town with a population approaching 180,000 in 1960, Gary was one of a number of cities and towns across the U.S. suffering from severe population loss, among other adverse effects of overseas competition on their mainstay industries. From having over 30,000 employees at its peak in 1970, the city's main employer, U.S. Steel Gary Works, retained just 6,000 employees in 1990. Under these circumstances, this city and its 77% African American population were witnessing explosive growth in one of the only industries guaranteed to boom under such difficult circumstances. 42-year-old Lee Andrew Edwards was one of the entrepreneurs who had found a place in the heroin trafficking business, and by all accounts, he had done very well for himself. With the proceeds from his illegal business, he had bought 2 residential homes, including 460 Taft Place, an apartment building, a liquor store, and a new car, all paid for with cash. Now, according to court records from the United States Court of Appeals 7th Circuit, the DEA agents arrived at the property to execute a search warrant after a 7-month FBI investigation involving Edwards' brother, Jimmy, had implicated him as the narcotics kingpin of Gary. Edwards did not open the door for the agents, who were forced to break into the house. He then fired 3 gunshots at them, after which he surrendered. DEA agents found weapons including a carbine rifle, thousands of dollars in cash, drug prepping equipment including a triple beam scale, and several grams of cocaine and heroin powder in the house. He was later sentenced to life in prison, but not before something about his business operation came to the fore. Federal investigators had determined that Edwards' heroin supply came from a Nigerian drug dealer in Chicago called Abiodun Agbele. Abiodun had earlier agreed to work for the feds in exchange for lighter sentencing, and as part of the plea deal, he revealed everything he knew about the heroin trade in Chicago. Located at the junction of 4 states with a combined population exceeding 27 million at the time, Chicago was a key trafficking hub in the American heroin trade, and as it turned out, the wholesale trade of an especially potent form of heroin from Southeast Asia in 1990 Chicago was controlled by Nigerian criminal gangs. The following excerpt is taken from the January 2001 Illinois Drug Threat Assessment published by the U.S. Justice Department's National Drug Intelligence Center. Nigerian criminal groups are responsible for wholesale distribution of most of the SEA heroin shipped into Chicago. SEA heroin, which is 80 to 90% pure, is being sold by Nigerian traffickers for $80,000 to $110,000 per kilogram. Wholesalers in Chicago usually sell heroin without cutting it to minimize the handling of the product and their exposure to law enforcement. Now, Agbele himself was no criminal mastermind, however. As he testified under oath, that honor belonged to a man who went by the name of Adegboyega Muiz Akonde, who was apparently his uncle. Shortly after Agbele's arrival in the US, Akonde had taken him under his wing and showed him the ropes of wholesale heroin trafficking. When Akonde returned to Nigeria in mid-1990, Agbele was left in charge of selling regular heroin shipments from Nigeria to Lee Edwards and delivering the profits to his uncle. In the meantime, The Nigerian-led heroin trade in Chicago fed an addiction epidemic that became so bad that it changed local health and law enforcement practices. For the first time, providing addicts with free access to safe syringes and needles to ensure that they did not share them and possibly spread HIV became a core focus of public health policy. In other words, SEA heroin from Nigeria was so potent and addictive that public health policy in Chicago shifted away from trying to make heroin addicts stop using altogether to merely ensuring that they used safely. A notable organization that did such outreach work with heroin addicts was the Chicago Recovery Alliance. While researching this story, I reached out to its current executive director, John Werning, to get a sense of how the heroin epidemic changed.
Now to the main story. The West African Weekly and also an investigative journalist, David Hundeyin and Aaron Greenspan of Plainsite, have won the lawsuit which they jointly instituted against the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, Internal Revenue Services, IRS, Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, State Department, and Justice Department regarding the unredacted release of law enforcement records relating to President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's history of heroin trafficking in Chicago. Well, Judge Beryl A. Howell of the United States District Court for the District of Columbia, who made the ruling on Tuesday, April 8th, stated in the ruling that keeping such information away from public knowledge using Glomar responsesunder, the excuse of individual privacy exemptions is neither logical nor plausible. According to FBI and DEA, accordingly, they were ordered to produce and release the relevant files using taking into account their court-ordered non-exempt status. The judgment, however, exempted the CIA from releasing the files in holds on Tinubu. So it's the FBI and the DEA that were ordered by the court to release documents concerning the president, Bola Ahmed Tinubu. And now, according to reports made public, Judge Beryl Howell of the U.S. District Court of the District of Columbia handed down the Tuesday judgment rejecting government agencies' attempts to withhold the documents under the so-called Glomar response, like I said earlier. It will be recalled that the case was jointly instituted by Greenspan and Hundeyin as part of a collaboration that began after Hundeyin in 2022 and his investigation and subsequent documentary titled Bola Ahmed Tinubu, which I just played a little snippet from that documentary to you before I started reading this. And it's titled From Drug Lord to Presidential Candidate. Well, Aaron Greenspan, an American transparency advocate and founder of Plainsite.org, who made that file the lawsuit in June 2023 after submitting a 12 FOIA, that's Freedom of Information Act request to various U.S. law enforcement and intelligence agencies. Now, these requests sought details of a federal investigation into the heroin trafficking network allegedly involving Tinubu and others, including Abiodun Agbele, Muiz Akonde, and Lee Andrew Edwards. He also cited a verified complaint filed by the U.S. Department of Justice in 1993 seeking the forfeiture of $460,000 in funds linked to Bola Tinubu, which the U.S. government alleged were proceeds of drug trafficking. The court document includes an affidavit by Kevin Moss, a special agent with the IRS at that time, who detailed the activities of a heroin ring operating in the Chicago area. So, in response to the FOIA lawsuit, President Tinubu, however, remember he intervened in October 2023, citing privacy concerns and objecting to the release of what he said is confidential tax records and documents from federal law enforcement agencies. However, Judge Howell has ruled against that, and he said that the public interest in understanding the records surrounding Tinubu's alleged involvement outweighs any other concern of any private person. Yes. All right. And in response to the complainant request for summary judgment on releasing the unrelated documents and records in November 2024, the DEA had incredibly attempted to argue that Tinubu's right to individual privacy supersedes the Nigerian public right to know this and scrutinize the background of their president. So DEA is saying that, in fact, the right of President Tinubu is more important than any information in Nigerian want to know. But however, now, the cocoa is that they have released, the court has ordered the FBI and the DEA to release those documents. Now, the question is, even though the presidency has refuted or dismissed this concern, and they are citing, saying that this information has been in public. However, what has been in public is the IRS information, not the DEA or the FBI information. Oh, well, let's see how it goes. Stay tuned, because I'm going to post for you the full documentary of David Hundeyin later. Thank you.